Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Transformative Agreements, How Innovation is Answering the Open Access Challenge. Before we begin, I do have a few Zoom housekeeping items. Due to the high volume of attendees, everyone will remain in listen-only mode to avoid any type of background noise. However, we do encourage questions during the event, and you can submit your questions at any time using the chat function. And with that, I would now like to hand the presentation over to the host of CCC's podcast, Beyond the Book, and the marketing director here at Copyright Clearance Center, Christopher Kenneally. Chris?
Well, thank you, Allison Anderton, and again, a warm welcome to everyone to our special town hall presentation from Copyright Clearance Center. Today's special program, Transformative Agreements, How Innovation is Answering the Open Access Challenge, will examine the impact of revolutionary change underway across the whole of the scholarly publishing ecosystem. For open access publishing programs, Transformative Agreements accelerate the research journey from hypothesis to results. These deals are the fruit of creative business negotiation together with innovative publishing technology. Now, whether the emphasis is on read and publish or publish and read, Transformative Agreements offer sustainable business models for disseminating knowledge. Publishers, authors, funders, and institutions have all supported these deals as reliable paths to reaching comprehensive open access. Yet to be truly transformative, such innovative agreements will transform publishing dramatically. Institutions and funders will demand sophisticated data to track compliance. Authors will expect more from the publishing experience, and every stakeholder will require state-of-the-art solutions that facilitate a productive workflow. And with that as an introduction, I want to turn to the audience first and get a sense of who you are with a couple of poll questions we have for you. So we would like to ask you to identify yourself by sector or role in our first question, which should be displayed on the screen there. Please choose one that comes closest to describing the work that you do. We'll give you a few moments to have a look at that list and decide what best describes your work, whether you work for a society or association, or a commercial publisher, pure play, open access publisher, funders of NGO or a public type, a university or an institution, or some sort of technology service provider. And we know we have seeing registrations from all those different groups. We want to get a sense of who's on the line with us right now. So just a few more seconds to make your identification, and we will display the results for you as we have them. They'll come up on the screen in just a moment to give us all a sense of who's in the room. Predominantly, it's interesting. Wow, quite a sort of even split. If I do my math pretty well, it's about half of the room from publishing community and the other half of the room from institutions and service providers. So that's really an interesting mix, and it gives us an idea of the players who have a real role in transformative agreements and the open access publishing ecosystem. Now for our second question, which is to ask you about your business models. If this would be for the publishers, what kind of OA agreements or business models apply to your organization or your house? Now you can choose more than one here. If all these apply, please indicate that, but we want to get a sense of, if you can, the popularity of some of these types of deals. And they range from those which are within the transformative agreements category of read and publish, publish and read. And of course, there are other types of open access business models that we've become familiar with over the years, Gold Road, OA, Green Road, even hybrid. So let us know if you're working with any of those. And in just a few more seconds, we'll wrap that up and display the results. All right, so let's see if we can see who we have in the room again. And again, judging by the color coding, a pretty even split. Everyone's doing at least something out there in the open access, pretty much, something in the open access arena. And interesting to me, at least, that the Gold Road OA still is a very popular form of business model, but we can see as well that Read and Publish and Read are also playing an important role. So thank you for sharing your work with us there and for sharing it with the audience. And now I want to turn to our first guest today on the program. I want to welcome Joe McShea. Joe McShea is Director of Market Intelligence Science Group for Clarivate Analytics, a global leader in providing trusted insights and analytics to accelerate the pace of innovation. She was previously Vice President and Lead Analyst, Science, Technology, and Healthcare for Outsell Inc. Joe McShea, welcome to our program.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone on today's session. So I thought it would be a good idea to kick off today's session with the definition of a transformative agreement. But pretty much as soon as I started working on the presentation, I realized I was probably a fool to think it would be that simple. The definition I've put up here is a godsend, actually, because it boils it down very clearly. But what I've found, and what you'll know, I'm sure, is that the more you dig, the more you realize that the simplicity that's sort of shown here hides a very different reality. As the main mode of institutional funding for open access publishing, transformative agreements are part of a really complex transition that the scholarly communication market is going through. And as such, they inevitably find themselves on the same shifting sands. And the definition here only really works because it is so high level. And the reality is that very few transformative agreements are the same. It's a confusing, complex landscape. Different organisations will have their own definitions of what constitutes a transformative agreement. And that may not look the same at Coalition S versus the Deal Consortium or California Digital Library. Whilst they will contain common elements relating to things like costs, copyright, transparency, transition, many elements are also very specific to the individual deal. So which titles are included in the deal, for example. And they're also likely to be referred to as either read and publish or publish and read, as we've just seen on the poll. Though again, that could depend on the individual publisher involved. In general though, and I'm sure you know this, but a read and publish agreement is one where the publisher receives payment for reading and payment for publishing bundled into a single contract. Whereas in a publish and read agreement, the publisher receives payment only for publishing and reading is included for no additional cost. There's been some debate around whether that's just semantics, that there isn't a huge difference between the two. But it does, it will impact on the predictability of revenues for the publisher and also on library consortia as they look at the cost distribution of a transformative agreement across consortia members. And in the case of publish and read deals, how that affects research intensive institutions especially. So in a nutshell, there is no one size fits all when it comes to transformative agreements. The landscape is a complex one of largely custom arrangements based on individual publisher and institutional priorities and the need to create different solutions for different disciplines, different geographical markets, and different types of institution. But saying all of that, however, there are particular trends and developments around transformative agreements that you can see across the marketplace. So transformative agreements are very much at the forefront of market news these days. I've had to update my presentation and my notes around it several times in the last few days. We've had the deal between Springer Nature and the University of California announced this week. Taylor and Francis and Ohio State University Libraries announced their deal last Friday, and Wiley and the IET announced theirs yesterday. But it's worth noting that transformative agreements aren't new. The ESAC Transformative Agreement Registry lists deals starting from 2015 onwards, and with multiple deals for all 5 of the largest publishers as well as many smaller ones. The registry currently lists 107 agreements in total, although bear in mind it's not necessarily 100% exhaustive, and it hasn't yet been updated with the TNF, Springer Nature or Wiley and IET deals of the past week. Despite Coalition S bringing transformative deals prominently into the spotlight over the last couple of years. Some developments did predate Plan S, although it's shocking to think that that's the case. One of those is the development of requirement frameworks for transformative deals by individual libraries, library consortia, and national agreements. And these are important because they look to create some level of clarity, thought leadership, and specificity up front to help establish common principles around the terms of the deals they're looking for. So back in 2015, a working group of the German Alliance of Science Organizations published a position paper focusing on improving transparency and sustainability in scholarly publishing and its transition to open access, for example. Whilst in the UK, JISC's requirements for transformative open access agreements was first published back in sort of 2016, 2017. And then more recently, we've seen the call to action from the University of California around negotiating journal agreements, which was published in July 2018. And then also another example is the MIT framework for publisher contracts, which was launched in October 2019 and now has 100 or so institutional signatories. Another really important development, I think, was and is Project Deal, which was something that the market was obsessed with around 2016 and onwards. And that's still going on today. So Deal was set up by the Alliance of Science Organizations in Germany to achieve agreement around access to the journal portfolios of Elsevier, Springer Nature and Wiley, and agreement around open access publishing terms. Finally, we are now in the position where 2 of the 3 agreements are in place. So between Wiley and Deal as of January 2019, and between Springer Nature and Deal as of January this year. An agreement between Elsevier and Deal remains unbrokered, with negotiations officially suspended since July 2018. But Deal is important, partly because of its size and the influence and importance of both the publishers involved and the German research market, but also I think because it highlights how interconnected this space is. So consortia become emboldened by each other. They're paying really close attention to what is going on elsewhere, and that's influencing each other strategically, which is why, you know, some of the cancellations or the negotiation breakdowns that happen are just as interesting as the deals that are agreed. And I'd also suggest that it works the same way with publishers too. So the Springer Nature deal with Deal potentially increasing pressure on Elsevier to try and find a way forward in the future. But as I mentioned, the announcement of Plan S in September 2018 has been the real recent catalyst in terms of moving transformative agreements up the agenda. Obviously, that hasn't been without its controversies, but I think the situation now is that it endorses several strategies in encouraging subscription publishers to transition to full and immediate open access. So they call them the transformative arrangements, and that includes transformative agreements, transformative models, and transformative journals. And most pertinent to this session, I think, is the announcement in April 2020 when Coalition S released updated guidance criteria for transformative journals following public consultation, in a move that I think has broadly been welcomed by the community. Most of the institutional agreements that I've sort of touched on so far have focused on subscription publishers that are transitioning to open access. But I also wanted to flag up the recent deals announced by PLOS with California Digital Library and Carnegie Mellon University as great examples of innovation in agreements, this time from a native open access publisher already aligned with current and emerging open access policies. So under the terms of the agreement with the University of California, UC libraries automatically pay the first $1,000 of the APC for all their affiliated authors choosing to publish in a PLOS journal, with authors then having the option to request full funding of the APC from libraries if they don't have the research funds available. The deal with Carnegie Mellon is slightly different. Here, researchers can publish in PLOS journals without incurring APCs, as Carnegie Mellon will be charged an annual fixed flat rate over the 2-year term based on prior year's publication levels. And finally, on this slide, I just wanted to highlight something that we're beginning to see in the space now. So expanded agreements, in which article publication related transformative agreements are part of something which is broader in scope. So Elsevier's recent deal in the Netherlands, for example, also includes open science services for research intelligence and scholarly communication, focused on advancing science and health outcomes through more open, reproducible and collaborative scholarly communication and knowledge systems. Moving on then, I just wanted to spend the last few minutes of my time looking at some of the challenges that lay ahead. So I've included the quote on the right-hand side as a reminder that transformative agreements are a transitional model designed for the specific purpose of creating a sustainable transition to full open access publishing. And if that model is successful, transformative agreements will no longer exist, and there will no longer be new subscription content for libraries to subscribe to. However, again, like with the definition on my first slide, here we have a model with an apparently simple aim that hides a huge amount of complexity and consequences for market stakeholders. Regardless of what they're trying to achieve, again, the reality is that transformative agreements are complex, expensive, and resource intensive for all of those involved. So authors, for example, are confused by the complex sort of shifting situation they face, often without a definitive list of agreements that their institution is part of, or the terms under which they need to publish compliantly. So support for the author in navigating this landscape is a key need, and why we're seeing a number of publishers establishing author portals that also support integration with their manuscript submission systems, for example. Linking things up for authors much earlier on in their workflow around the requirements of their institutions, their funders and their publishers is really critical. Institutions also find transformative agreements very resource intensive, and much of that burden is falling on the library at a time when resources are already extremely tight. And the library is often the ones who are educating researchers on the new procedures and the role of the library in managing them, although libraries haven't traditionally been part of an author's publishing process. And at the library consortia level, as we mentioned earlier, the difference between a read and publish deal and a publish and read deal can have a real impact on cost distribution across consortia members. And at the moment, not many institutions have the infrastructure in place to track the data needed to accurately calculate a transformative cost share model, although actually that's a component of the Wiley deal with Deal. But that means that many consortia are choosing to stick with existing cost share models. And with the number of publish and read deals increasing, I think that's very much a problem that's still looking for a solution in this space. For publishers, the situation is also complex. So transformative deals are resource intensive and administratively burdensome for them too. And as with the big deal before them, they're also typically undertaken only with the largest publishers because of the scale involved. So that makes it extremely difficult for smaller players, for societies to benefit from the deals and the support they provide in effecting a sustainable route to open access. And one of the consequences of this may be that more societies license titles to the big publishers, leading to a greater concentration of open access activity amongst the largest players. And actually that's exactly what's happened with the Wiley and IET deal that was announced yesterday. In relation to this particular topic, I'm sure you'll all be aware of the work commissioned by the Wellcome Trust and UKRI, carried out by Alicia Wise and Information Power, which has developed a toolkit for learned society publishers to engage in transformative agreements and fulfill the conditions of Plan S. Publishers are also finding themselves as the ones who are often obliged to develop those systems around managing, reporting and complying with the terms of a transformative agreement. And there aren't any standards for these systems. So that's another challenging and possibly unintended consequence of the agreements. But again, something that only the largest publishers have the resources to deal with. And then finally, just to sort of think about funders, they have been the real drivers behind the recent acceleration in transformative agreements. But it has to be said, With many of them, it's been more of a case of get this done rather than this is how it needs to be done for many of them. But they themselves need the systems and workflows to monitor the implementation, the compliance, and the enforcement of transformative deals. But so far, the funders as a kind of a cohort have shown very little inclination to create the systems themselves. So I think there's another key opportunity for innovation there. Just to kind of pull this all together then, I think it's pretty clear that innovation is alive and well in terms of all the work that is being done to negotiate these agreements. But I think it's also obviously a space that's still really crying out for the tools and solutions that help facilitate more streamlined workflows, as the challenges really are very real for all of the stakeholders involved. And absolutely, we've started to see that develop over the past year, 18 months or so in particular. So examples of solutions, obviously from CCC yourself, Aptara, the author solution developed for the Royal Society of Chemistry by 67 Bricks, for example, the Kronos platform for funders that's been spun out of the Gates Foundation, even tools such as Unsub. But I think my sort of final thoughts would be around how there is obviously scope for more, and that's a clear area of focus for innovation in this space going forwards.
Well, Joe McShea, thank you very much for that very comprehensive and up-to-date analysis of the state of play for transformative agreements. It's unusual to be in publishing and to have to be keeping up with breaking news, but you have done that. So thank you for that, Joe. And before we move on to our next guest, just a quick question about that notion that the Project Deal representative put forth, that in 5 years from now, if there are no more transformative agreements, then that will be success. What is your expectation? Are we going to get to that point? Are transformative agreements going to be vanishing in the next few years? We're already halfway through 2020. Publishing and this environment isn't known for moving quickly. Do you think we will get there that quickly?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think, in all honesty, I do think we will get there, but within 5 years. I think there's clearly some momentum here at the moment. We have some timeframes in place, thinking of the transformative journals timeframe from Coalition S, which is pitched at 2024. I think there will definitely be pockets where you've got institutions, publishers who have really gone a long way with this, with the transition. But I based on the experience of the last 20 years or so in terms of the broader open access movement, I don't think I would put a pin in a 5-year time frame, I have to say.
All right, well, thank you for that candid assessment. And Joe McShea with Clarivate Analytics will be back for some questions at the end of our program. But now I'd like to turn to our next guest, and that is Matthew Day. He is Head of Open Research Policy and Partnerships at Cambridge University Press, where he works on the press's policies, community engagement, and strategic development in open research for academic books and journals. We're talking about the dynamic environment we're in, but it's worth remembering that CUP was founded in 1534, and that makes it the world's oldest publishing house. So while it's one of the world's oldest publishing, or it is the world's oldest publishing house, it's also one on the cutting edge of all of this. So Matt Day, over to you to tell us about the experiences at your institution.
Thanks, Chris, and hello, everybody. So that was a great introduction, Joe. I'm glad it's been recorded. I might use some of that concise potted history of transformative agreements. It's because we need them now. They've been going on only for a few years, but a lot has happened. I thought I would start by giving you a bit of context and then talk through some of the issues that Joe raised from a CUP perspective. So I think the read and publish deal, which is our chosen transformative agreement route, has actually been a big part of our gaining confidence that we can go all our way. For a long while it was, wouldn't it be great if we could, and we probably need to, but no one could really see how. And our first transformative agreement with the Dutch consortium in 2016 was a big part, I think a big part of our gaining confidence as an organization that we could find a way to make this work. But it's still very much a work in progress, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So while for us it's incredibly exciting to be on this journey for complete OA in our journals, 100% OA, and to make that as easy as possible for the authors. So no author paid APCs, you know, a really easy system for people to publish, and it's OA. That's tremendously exciting, but there's still that uncertainty, you know, that low level anxiety of that you can't predict the future and things are changing, and it's that adds into the overall excitement for us. So read and publish is our chosen route, I mean, I guess for lots of reasons, to this purely OA world. And I think other groups will need to maybe look at different ways, but for us, it's so clearly the dominant route. Not the only route. There will be, you know, sponsorship-based models for some journals. You know, there'll probably be new approaches emerging, but by and large, for us, it's read and publish. And if we move on to our map of the deals that we have at the moment, it's grown hugely over the last couple of years. So we've now got around 26, with more in the pipeline. They're all over the world. Some of them are in places that we didn't really expect to be getting quite early. Some of them we've got a roadmap. Some of these places that we clearly wanted to work with and get a deal in place, but some of them are, you know, surprised us a little bit. So it looks very positive, and it is very positive, but at 26 is nowhere near enough. So we've got to get a lot more in place as quickly as possible. And coming to your point, Joe, about can we do it in 5 years? It's tough, right? I mean, we've got to get all of our customers under read and publish in 5 years, and some of those deals aren't up for renegotiation this year. So it's complex, and I think it is going to take a bit of time, and there is going to be a transitionary period when we're operating several models at once. But hopefully, eventually, we will get to a point where it's all OA, and a big part of that for us will be read and publish. So I think to move on to the next slide, to talk about what this means in practice, every one of these deals is essentially unique, really, for us. It's a different negotiation with a different partner, and they're very complex, and they're essentially partnerships. It's two sides saying, we want to go OA, you want to go OA, how can we do it? What are the constraints? What do we need to focus on first? You know, we need to align our goals, and we need to get a sense of perspective about the other's ambitions and realistic about what could be achieved in a certain time period. So there's definitely a big negotiation process, of much deeper understanding of each party. Have to talk very honestly about your goals and your constraints. You need to come to some shared agreement about data. So how much an institute has published with that publisher, with us, over the last few years. That in itself is a challenge, because it all hinges on metadata. And that's my first point, really, about the really important things to make these deals work can be often quite boring, and actually the metadata, knowing who has published from which institutes in which journals and when, and how much the APC was paid. Metadata like that is incredibly important, and actually just agreeing the article output of an institute is complicated and can take a bit of time. And other parts of the agenda that need to be agreed are really how fast, how quickly it moves, how much money there is to support that. If the institute's already paying a lot for subscriptions and it isn't publishing that much, then it's quite easy to get all of that quickly. But if it's the opposite, they're not paying much but publishing a lot, that's a slightly different negotiation. So everything is very unique. And as I say, it's a partnership. I think it really is a partnership towards OA. So once a deal is negotiated, if we move on, thank you, to what happens in practice. So the implementation of the deal, that's also extremely complicated, because you're no longer just giving an institute online access and maybe sending them some print copies. You're trying to find the authors, you're messaging authors before they submit to the journal. You're trying to pick them up when they submit and make sure that they get included under a read and publish deal. That if there's a lot of author choice and the author gets to choose whether they're OA or not, then they're aware that they can and they don't have to pay, and that they should. There's a lot of workflow, author awareness, monitoring kind of processes going on, and at the end of all this there's a whole load of reporting processes. So obviously the institute wants to know, well, how many of our authors took up the deal and how many didn't, and what are you doing to get those authors that didn't to take up the deal, because we want them all to go away. So a very much different scenario for both the institute and the publisher and the author once the deal is signed. Complicated, and we're rebuilding our entire systems, really, from marketing, legal, editorial, production. Every part of our machine is being adjusted, and there's going to be a lot more adjustments still to come, I think, because as Joe said, defining what a transformative agreement is well, there are lots, and they're still evolving, and they will continue to change. And that means somehow whatever direction they go, and you've got to be able to support that. The publisher has to be able to support that. So in practice, they're complicated, very intensive. There's a lot of manual work as well as improvements to our automated systems. So it's very much an evolving thing for us. So we've done quite a few, and we think we know what we're doing by and large, but it's still very much evolving, and we have to walk. Sometimes we ask some of our customers to kind of hold our hands a little and bear with this as we get capable of getting all the authors to go away under a deal. The partnership continues after the deal is negotiated. And I think taking care of all these relationship points and the data points and the workflow points, taking care of all that, and giving them, due weight and consideration, and focus for how things can be improved, are all parts for us about what constitutes a transformative agreement. Thank you.
Well, Matt Day with Cambridge University Press, thank you very much for that. And your emphasis there on partnerships makes me think that rather like snowflakes in marriages, there are no two alike, and this would be the case with transformative agreements. However, these are partnerships where there are other parties sort of looming around, and that, of course, would be funders. Your relationship has changed with the universities and the institutions that you work with, but it's also brought into light the role of funders in the publishing ecosystem. Are you watching that closely?
Yeah, it's fascinating, actually. Funders are really, the relationship between the publisher like us and the funder is changed out of all recognition over the last few years, and I think that has created some tensions, but by and large I think it's brought us closer together. It's brought a deeper understanding in each side of that relationship. So I see it as a very good thing. The funders have a huge amount of power and clout, and they've realized in the last few years how to use it, and not all publishers are particularly appreciative of that, perhaps, but it's vital for getting OA at scale. So, maybe there are a few discussions here and there about this issue or that issue, or this funder policy, or where that funder policy is going. They need, they can be quite heated, but they have to, it's all in the spirit of, okay, this is going to get us to full OA, and we need all parties, institutes, publishers, funders, to be working towards that. So it's ultimately very good.
Well, Matt Day with Cambridge University Press, thank you for that. And now we will bring in someone representing a very important institution. Joining us on the line is Ellen Finnie. She recently joined California Digital Library as Open Access Publisher Agreements Manager, where she's responsible for open access publisher agreements across a broad spectrum of publishing partners, and is in support of the University of California's Transformative Open Access Initiatives. With headquarters in Oakland, California, CDL is one of the world's largest digital research libraries. And Ellen Finnie, thank you, and we look forward to hearing about your perspective from CDL.
Terrific. Thanks so much. I'm really delighted to be joining today, especially hearing Joe and Matthew. I hope you'll see echoes of everything they've been saying in what I'll say today. I think that we're all observing the same landscape, and that's reassuring in its own way, even though the challenges are many. So first, I want to address why University of California is building these transformative agreements. Our emphasis on open access publishing really flows from UC's mission and from core principles that have emerged from that mission. Particularly central is UC's core aim to transmit advanced knowledge, and a series of related commitments that have come from faculty and from administration, all supporting open access publishing. So these commitments have been expressed through open access policies that cover all UC authors, through signatures on the OA 2020 expression of interest by all 10 UC campuses, a faculty-led declaration of principles to shift publishing to openness, and as Joe mentioned, a very high-level commitment or call for using journal negotiations to advance open access. In terms of advancing that open access, and this is now calling upon, yep, thanks, to the next slide. The starting point is really the productive negotiations with publishers. And as Matthew was saying, this is really all about partnerships. In this inventing and exciting creation stage, we are really working together as partners. So our approach is to hold open discussions in which we seek alignment of priorities and we identify mutual interests that we can aim toward, with examples that are captured here on the slide. We also need to acknowledge and respect and work with the areas where the priorities may be in tension or they may be in imperfect alignment. Our effort is to have open discussions that are grounded in principles and very much in data, as Matthew pointed out, and we can't emphasize enough, but also with this kind of flexibility built in for the specific priorities and the limits of each partner. So regarding those principles and priorities, these are some of the core elements for us at University of California. We're seeking 100% open access for UC authors. We want a consistent author experience through the year. The opportunity has to be available consistently through the year. We simply must have cost containment. At this point, especially with the COVID crisis, we need cost reduction and we need predictability in costs. We want to shift our payments that are supporting subscriptions to payments that support open access publishing. We recognize very much, as Joe and Matthew have both echoed, that the current environment requires space to experiment and openness to iterate in order to find models that will be sustainable and that can shift the whole market to open access. And we really believe that as part of this emphasis on sustainability, a primary approach is to build the participation of authors and research grant funding into the payment stream. And that is also echoing what Matthew was saying about needing all the players in order for the economics to work. So we do this through our multi-payer workflow. And this model was created by the University of California. It manifests the core strategic aims of advancing open access in a way that can also be sustainable in terms of cost, because it provides a mechanism to introduce research funds, if available, into the process, along with library-based payments. So from the author's perspective, we're building our model to minimize intrusion into the publishing process, while we still are incorporating them into the payment process in some form, so they understand the costs of publishing in the new landscape, and importantly, so there's a vehicle to draw upon sponsored research funds, which are an essential component of sustainably paying for the distribution of research. So the diagram lays out how authors participate in this multi-payer workflow process. They still choose their journal, submit the manuscript, and pass through peer review as normal. We're not asking them to change how they do any of those things. Once a manuscript is accepted by a journal with a publisher, where we have a transformative agreement, the author is asked to choose whether to publish open access or opt out of the agreement and publish closed access. Of course, we prefer the authors publish OA, and that's our intention, to make it that the default, but we don't require that of authors. So assuming the author does publish open access or choose to publish open access, they're going to be asked to coordinate payment of an open access fee. In general, we have a discounted open access fee that we have worked out with the publisher. The library commits to paying a portion of every one of those OA fees, and we call that the library subvention. Then we ask the author whether they have research funding available, which may be used to pay for publication. If so, then the author pays the remainder of the OA fee. If they don't have research funding available for this purpose, then the library pays the remainder of the OA fee on the author's behalf. So in this way, the authors engage with the payment process and they contribute a portion of the cost if they have funding to do so. However, authors without research funding are not disadvantaged, because then the libraries will pay the entire fee when the grant funds are not available. Important to many of the points that have been made about the need to have sustainable workflows, all the library payments are made as an aggregated bulk payments. We don't process separate transactions for these payments. So how we actually implement this workflow is critically important, in that these agreements will ultimately fail if the workflow is not functional. What we focus on is keeping the author journey foremost in mind. We want authors to have a seamless experience. We do workflow testing with authors. We design workflows that fit existing author behavior. We work jointly with the publisher on terminology and processes to encourage author participation. And we focus on workflows that are sustainable and extensible. So there can be challenges in addressing multiple publisher or journal workflows that are highly divergent. And this can mean there's a benefit to a third-party system for the payment process, which then allows this kind of transferability to other publishers, again, supporting sustainability and extensibility in this environment. One critical element we want to call out, and I so appreciated Matthew's point about metadata being absolutely crucial to all of this functioning. In particular, we've noted the need for strong mechanisms to identify author affiliation and capture that information, and the need to deploy a range of technological means to identify author affiliation. There are real limits we're noting to using only an email address, for example, and we're seeing the need to incorporate grid ID and other elements. So it's important to stress that while we have these particular principles, we have these suggested approaches, we are trying to work with whatever the publisher's existing system is and limit the work that the publisher needs to do. In the case of Cambridge University Press, for example, that meant working with RightsLink, which has the side benefit, as I noted, of potentially helping us in other publisher conversations. But generally what we're trying to do is put forward our requirements and then work with the publisher to manifest those requirements. So just to sum up, we recognize there are certain foundations that are just critically important to developing these transformative agreements. We need to work from principles. We need data as a foundation. We need to realize that in the moment we are still all co-creating new business models. This is the kind of fluidity that has been covered by both Joe and Matthew, and that we're doing that based on mutual interests. We have to commit ourselves to continuing to experiment, assess, and iterate, because we are in a transformative stage. And as everyone has noted, at this time, it really requires an investment of significant resources in workflow development and in support, including clear reporting, in order for us to get this whole thing to work. And primarily what we keep in mind, and what we know the publishers keep in mind too, is that we need to enter the author's existing practices and behaviors rather than try to introduce things that they will have to learn about and do separately. So it's very important for us to work with the publisher on assessing the whole journey, understanding author behaviors, so that we can partner to develop the best system possible. So thanks very much. That's what we're doing at the University of California, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this and hear from all the speakers.
Well, we appreciate you joining us, and particularly sort of enunciating those principles, which I'm sure many in the institutional community, the university community, will recognize and identify with, Ellen. And since it's been brought up by Joe McShea, and it is breaking news on Tuesday, CDL, the University of California, signed a deal with Springer Nature that was characterized as the largest open access agreement in North America to date. Very briefly, can you tell us why that's such an important agreement?
Well, thanks so much. And yes, we're very, very excited about this, and we appreciate your queuing it up a little bit for us to talk about. It is the first Springer Nature agreement in North America, transformative agreement, so that makes it a big precedent-setting move. It also incorporates a time frame for transitioning nature journals into a transformative environment, which we think is also very significant and makes this an important agreement to look at. I did want to mention that some of the key characteristics are that we're implementing this over time in 3 phases. In 2020, open access publishing for our authors in the subscription and hybrid journals will occur at no cost. Once we have a mechanism in place, and for 2021, the multipayer system that I think Joe helpfully described, and which I went into as well, will be in play with our Springer Nature journals. And then in 2022, after the work on an open science pilot, we will be integrating Nature branded journals into the open publishing part of the agreement, which we think is really a big, important point to make about why this agreement is worth looking at. So it encompasses really the kind of goals that I just described. It is using the multi-payer model, so we are drawing in research funds when available. It covers 100% OA for our authors in the journals included. And very importantly, there's a cost reduction to start and risk protection in subsequent years, which, as I noted, is more and more important in our current times. So we appreciate your interest there, and we have information up on the OSC site if anyone wants more information on that.
All right. Well, again, Ellen Finnie with California Digital Library. Thank you so much.
We're partners.
And now I want to turn to a colleague of mine from Copyright Clearance Center, Jamie Carmichael. She is Senior Director of Publisher Solutions at Copyright Clearance Center, where she oversees the product marketing practice for CCC's publisher portfolio with a focus on rights link for scientific communications. And welcome to the program, Jamie Carmichael. And I know that our perspective at Copyright Clearance Center is one where we follow all the moving parts here, and that's been demonstrated in the presentations up to this point. We see there are a lot of interlocking pieces, and that's an area that we explored in depth very recently.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. What I'm going to walk through today are a closer look at some of the challenges as well as the opportunities presented by the rise of transformative agreements. And it's actually going to reinforce a lot of what each of my colleagues have already stated. I'll be sharing our learnings from CCC's perspective through our help in supporting various stakeholder groups navigate some of the complexities that are emerging with the implementation of the agreements. What we're looking at here is a map of the scientific publishing ecosystem that we created with Outsell last fall. It became clear to us in our work across these various stakeholder groups that have been mentioned today that there were gaps in a common understanding of the contributions and investments and challenges across the ecosystem. So this map sets out to examine 5 nodes from research and discovery all the way through to post-publication, with the motivations and concerns of all stakeholders outlined against each stage. This is available on copyright.com for anyone who's interested. We've been using this map as a tool to foster discussion and collaboration across those stakeholder groups. And that has reinforced to me the notion that although transformative agreements can look very different publisher by publisher, having sustainable, scalable infrastructure to support them remains central to the dialogue. It's all about the mutual interest that Ellen was just describing. There's certainly a shared view across publishers, authors, funders, and institutions that for open access publishing to be viable in 2020 and beyond, solutions have to meet the needs of the unique stakeholders. And what I mean by that is authors really shouldn't be burdened with unnecessary administrative tasks. Consortia can't hire 10 people to operationalize an agreement, and publishers can't flip their business models overnight. These groups need solutions that are data-driven, collaborative, and transparent to ensure that agreement terms are properly implemented, that you can deliver on what you set out to do in the contract, that pricing and discounting is visible to all parties so that each one can track the efficacy of their own agreement, and also to ensure that workflows are simplified for all parties. I'd say in the current pandemic climate, we can't overlook this enough. Publishers and institutions are going to need really scalable solutions because they could be running some very lean operations. And so next we'll take a look at some of the nuance around managing the agreements. So as Joe said, although they're not new, we're certainly seeing that 2020 is the year where transformative agreements are being implemented, tested, and measured across a really broad group of publishers, large and small, established and new to open access publishing. We're seeing some very creative strategies actually coming out of some of our smaller society publishing partners, which is very exciting. This momentum is fantastic, but it's also crucial that as stakeholders test these agreements, they're implementing methods to carefully manage and track them to learn and adjust over time. There's no one size fits all when it comes to these deals. So for example, on one hand, you could have hundreds of institutions under a consortium deal with one set of terms and related workflow requirements, and a much smaller agreement on the other hand with a completely different set of parameters that need to be managed differently downstream. So the operating framework needs to be driven by accurate and complete metadata. Completely agree with the statements before about the importance of metadata, about the author, about the institution, about the research paper. The framework needs to be flexible enough to accommodate different categories of agreements, and ideally the framework is also one that is shared across stakeholders to drive meaningful value through the power of the network effect. The management and tracking of agreements also requires continuous investment to address the needs of all the stakeholders. So that could come in the form of new workflows, new reporting, new communications. It's this call for scalable, adaptable tools that drives our own continuous investments in RightsLink for Scientific Communications, which is our common platform used by authors, institutions, publishers, and funders for APC payment and agreement management. We're helping publishers strike a balance between flexibility and scalability through education and technology. We've had sessions with different teams across publishers, funders, and institutions work through what it takes to operationalize these deals so that they're properly supported. It's important that internal teams are aligned across various functions, and in publishing houses that might look like, the sales team, the operations team, the strategy group, marketing, editorial. It's a wide group to get that culture shift in place. We actually held a workshop on transformative agreements earlier this year at Researcher to Reader, and we had a mixed group in the room. And one of the biggest pain points for the librarians and the scholarly communications directors in the room was data transparency. And I think this is something that the publishers might experience as well. Some had trouble accessing data around their published output, and others had trouble getting it in enough time to make business decisions. In a shared platform, the data underlying the payment processing and the workflow tools are accessible to publishers, institutions, and funders. So I'll draw on an example from RightsLink. If you have a threshold of 100 prepaid tokens outlined in an agreement, both the publisher and the institution have a view into that usage to know when the next set of business rules will kick in or when to re-up, etc. Our publishing partners are now managing agreements with more than 300 institutions and consortia. And as this number grows, so does the overall efficiency and transparency throughout the marketplace. And now I want to take a quick look at where we think things are heading. So the pressure on publishers to innovate is high. I don't think that's a secret. The need for tools and automation for facilitating the continuous testing of the transformation of their businesses at a pace their partners require is imperative. And so if 2020 is the year where these agreements are being broadly tested, then in the next 6 to 12 months, we expect to start to see a shift from traditional APC payment methods where authors transact toward a workflow that completely removes the author from the process. That might not be suitable for everyone. There's absolutely still room for different models, such as the one that Ellen was describing, but we are starting to see more and more adoption of this kind of a workflow. So on this slide, we depict 3 general workflows for open access publishing, all of which start with acceptance of the manuscript. What that means in RightsLink, for example, is the manuscript acceptance status is passed either through our publishing partners or directly through one of our submissions partners to trigger events. In the left column, you have the standard workflow where the author pays an APC. And as you can see, that takes several steps. You notify the author, they choose their payment method, maybe they pass that bill on to their institution, etc. The middle column is an agreement workflow where the author seeks funding under the terms of an agreement, and again with some touch points there. But in the third column, we have what we call the agreement workflow, which we created alongside some very visionary publishers recently, and that completely removes the author from the funding process, which is extremely important because we're seeing that some of these agreements actually require no author involvement, and there can be penalties if that requirement is not met. In this workflow, institutions and funders actually also have the option of opting out of the approval process and instead automating it, which is a really nice benefit. So I'll wrap by saying that it is possible to satisfy the needs of various stakeholders, but as you've heard through some of the experiences shared today, it really takes common data-driven tools to get there. And I completely agree with Ellen's sentiments on that. That is the lifeblood of transformative agreements from our perspective.
Well, Jamie Carmichael with Copyright Clearance Center, thanks for that. And you talk about data-driven solutions. That's about predictability, reliability, transparency. But you also raised the point of the pandemic, and that throws everything up in the air. I wonder if you can expand just very briefly on what you're seeing in the marketplace, the impact of the pandemic, and what you think perhaps all the stakeholders should be sort of watching more carefully as a result.
Sure. So I think the pandemic has certainly accelerated the shift to open, the drive to open. I think we'll see funding mandates continue to evolve and adapting quickly and benefiting from the learnings of your colleagues, whether you're a publisher, you're an institution, or a funder, is really going to be essential. It's that spirit of experimentation that I think is going to help, advance this whole initiative. For the industry flip to be successful and for individual organizations to remain viable, there has to be sharing. There has to be experimentation. The pandemic just I think, amplifies that. Leveraging shared infrastructure and quickly iterating on workflows that drive costs and unnecessary touch points out of the equation that empower you to make data-driven decisions, that's a huge part of what we think it's going to take to flip the business model of scholarly publishing.
Ellen Finnie with the California Digital Library, I saw you vigorously nodding your head in agreement there. Can you give us your thoughts on that question about the pandemic and its impact?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting major driver, right? Because the government and research funders have seen so viscerally the need for open access with their inability of the US government, for example, to quickly access the research they funded around COVID-19. So there's been the story told in such a, it's really cast into high relief, that need, I think, and all players have seen that. At the same time, we have new financial problems and limits, which are going to make implementing and the shift forward even more challenging. But the bottom line is we already knew we needed to contain costs and advance open access. So in my view, I think we have this defining moment that we can all use as a catalyst. And I think that was kind of a word someone else used. And I think that's what it is. It's a catalyst of phenomena that were already in play, but it's simply made them, we can see them even more clearly. And I find that to be extremely compelling. And I think all the players in the space that I've talked to do too. So, and the challenge is, I think what's really awesome about this whole shift of the market is the kind of partnerships that are being built as described here, between institutions, funders, publishers, and campuses and other entities to make all this happen. And that's really exciting and really productive. So thank you for all of that.
Right. Well, in fact, we are seeing those partnerships on display here in this very conference call. And I want to actually reinforce our partnership with the audience. You have one more poll question to get a sense as we leave the program today about your most important concerns. And as you look ahead over the next 12 months, we'd like to know that biggest concern that's going to be keeping you and your organization up at night. And this is really directed, I guess, at publishers, although others may have some views on this. What's the biggest concern? Is it maintaining a sustainable revenue mix? Is it the compliance and the tracking of the agreement that we've heard so much about, the importance of metadata there, the impact it's going to have, the transformative agreements and open access evolution is going to have on your submission systems? Jamie Carmichael was making the point, and others have said this as well, that removing authors from the workflow is critical, but that's difficult. Is that keeping you up at night? And then finally, we know that in the audience among the publishers, it's not just about journals, it's about books. And is that what you are most concerned about over the next 12 months? Give us your vote on the most important concern. Give you a few more seconds for that, and then let's see what how the vote looks. And there we are. Well, perhaps not surprisingly, and again at this particularly uncertain moment for everyone with the pandemic, maintaining a sustainable revenue mix gets the most votes. But it's interesting to me, at least, to see that this confirms what Matt Day was saying earlier, that this metadata is so critical, and that's going to be what will drive the compliance and the tracking that will make these work today and in the future. It has been a fascinating hour, an hour that's flown right by for me. Particularly happy to have Ellen Finnie with us because of the late breaking news from the California Digital Library and its deal with Springer Nature, the largest such transformative agreement in North America. I want to thank all of our participants today. We've been speaking with Joe McShea with Clarivate Analytics, where she's Director of Market Intelligence for the Science Group. Matthew Day, the Head of Open Research Policy and Partnerships at Cambridge University Press. Ellen Finnie, the Open Access Publisher Agreements Manager at California Digital Library, as well as with my colleague Jamie Carmichael, Senior Director of Publisher Solutions at Copyright Clearance Center. Really happy to have all of you join us today. Thank you very much indeed. I also want to take a moment to thank my CCC colleagues who've helped put this program together. That's Allison Anderton, Doreen Masiak, Joanna Murphy-Scott, and Haley Sun. We appreciate all of your contributions for the production and particularly attracting such a wonderful audience. We've had over 200 people attending today, and we really appreciate that kind of a turnout. To learn more about transformative agreements and to find analysis of the latest developments in open access publishing, as well as many more subjects, we urge you to go visit Copyright Clearance Center's blog, Velocity of Content. You can subscribe to the blog and not miss any of the updates. You're also welcome to listen to discussions about transformative agreements, including issues related to Coalition S and other open access publishing issues by subscribing to CCC's podcast series, Beyond the Book. You can find that wherever you go for podcasts. And finally, as Jamie Carmichael mentioned, for a closer look at the scholarly publishing ecosystem map, please go to copyright.com/scientific publishing ecosystem. And with that, I want to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Christopher Kenneally for Copyright Clearance Center. Bye for now.